On the occasion of the National Accessibility Week, we at Pedesting are focusing exclusively on children and youth with disabilities, viewed through the lens of recreation and growth. My name is Josephine and I work with Pedesting as a communications and partnerships lead. Today, I have with me two very special guests. Let me introduce Dr. David Legg. He's an MRU Health and Physical Education professor and the president of the International Federation of Adapted Physical Activity. He's one of the 11 inductees to the 2022 Alberta Sports Hall of Fame and have served as the president of the Canadian Para-Olympic Committee. His work in adapted physical activity has profoundly impacted recreation sports by enhancing accessibility and visibility on local, provincial, and international levels. He is also the co-chair of the Calgary Adapted Hub. Welcome to the discussion, Dr. David.
Thank you very much for having me.
Next, we have with us Ashley Fox. She's the director of Calgary Adapted Hub. She has over 15 years of experience supporting physical, mental, and social well-being initiatives across Alberta. She's also a certified exercise physiologist, health coach, and facilitator. We're very excited to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Josephine.
So, to start with something a bit lighter to get us warmed up, could each of you share a favorite memory from your own childhood experiences with recreation or play that has impacted your current work?
Wow. You want to go first?
Sure, I have one that comes to mind. I grew up in a small town where recreational opportunities were often limited by who could coach or maybe what was available for facilities and whatnot in the area. And so we spent a lot of time in arenas. And so I grew up in the sport of figure skating, and a memory that stays with me is the opportunity that I had really early on to become a program assistant. So I learned about the art of coaching at a really young age. So I was able to participate in the sport, but I was able to learn about coaching. And I think it was that actually lit more of a spark around connecting with other young children and youth that wanted to participate in sport and different modalities, pedagogies of how to make sure that they were able to succeed in whatever they wanted to do.
That's wonderful. Were you also into figure skating?
So then I was able to figure skate and coach skating all throughout high school. And then that was my first job when I came to Calgary as well, as I was able to coach skating at the Olympic Oval, which was somewhat of a dream coming from a small community to then be able to come in to the Olympic Oval and coach skating through the University of Calgary Active Living programs.
That is wonderful. I love figure skating.
Yeah, okay.
I do. Yes.
The first one that came to mind was I played high school basketball, stand-up basketball, and my neighbor, who would have been 8 to 10 years older than me, was on the Olympic basketball team, the Canadian Olympic basketball team, and he also played university basketball at Duke University in the United States, which is a high-profile basketball school, and he would, through his mom and my mom, who were best friends, I would get his hand-me-down clothes. Okay. And he was 6'8", and I'm 6 feet tall.
Okay.
But I would get, and he has size 16 shoes, and I wear size 11. But nonetheless, I loved getting his hand-me-down clothes, particularly the things that would say Basketball Canada or Duke Basketball, and those sort of things. So I would wear them to school. And I would wear size 16 used basketball shoes to school and track pants and a hoodie for a person who was 6'8" to school, and I would just be swimming in these clothes. But I just thought I was the coolest guy sitting in class with these size 16 Converse basketball shoes, and that there was one night in particular where the Olympic team played another country in an exhibition game at the university in the city I grew up at, Brock University, and all or half the team came down to his house after the game, and I stood at the window peering out and staring at all these guys getting out of their cars and going into the house next door. And my mom, I only found out about this later, phoned his mom and said, David is just going absolutely snaky over here. Could you just get Danny to bring his teammates over just to say a quick hello? And he did. And he came over. And so, again, these are, 24, 25-year-old men, and I would have been, again, 14 at the time or something like that. But for them just to come over and just to say hello and to take a picture with me that I still have in my office. It was just little moments like that I think back to. And, when you asked me that question, that was one that came to mind right away.
It's quite a feeling, and that those memories kind of impacts us long way, right? It stays with us.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for sharing this really wonderful experiences. So moving on to our discussion. So I wanted to hear from you both about what are some of the what's the current state of recreation. It looks like recreational accessibility for children and youth looks like in Calgary, and what is the work that Calgary Adapted Hub plays in this?
Sure.
Do you want to introduce the hub first?
Sure. So the Calgary Adapted Hub has evolved over a period of time, and the concept and the idea really isn't all that complicated, in that it's a collective of individuals who are offering and managing and advocating and running adapted physical activity programs, but just doing it in a coordinated fashion. So that umbrella organization that connects people to benefit from an economies of scale and just to share resources and ideas and aspirations. And so the first part of your question was, well, what's currently going on? And I would say it's not too different than has been in the past, that there are a lot of really great programs, but they are often small. They are often nonprofit, volunteer driven. They tend to kind of operate somewhat in isolation and in silos from one another. And that was in part the genesis for the Calgary Adapted Hub. Now, I would say that a lot of those programs continue to operate, but, and I don't want to take credit for this, but I think the Calgary Adapted Hub has allowed some of them to scale and grow, to become more aware to the participant and their families, and so that the registrations, I think, are continuing to increase and fill. And then the programs, because they're starting to connect with other programs, are perhaps learning little things here and there to make them just that much better. So I'd like to think that, kind of that philosophy of a rising tide raising all ships, is that the programs and the services that are in the city have all just gotten a little bit better, just by working together and connecting and collaborating with one another.
And I think with our 12 core partners and 60 plus community partners, one of the things that we've been able to do is to diversify the types of programs. So one of the things that, and again, this is an evolution, right? There's room for growth, but where the growth has been prominent has been that there are more children and youth coming to programs who maybe otherwise didn't know that they could have access to, and that's due in part to having both inclusive programs where children that experience a disability are welcome into a typical type program, whether that's because of quality coaching, low ratios, additional support needs being met with the programs, or a specific adapted program, so that a child might be participating with somebody who experiences a disability like themselves.
Okay.
So not only do we find that there's a lot of growth from the play and the participation, but also the social well-being is increased because the families continue to meet families who may experience barriers that they do. They build a community as well as part of the participation. So I think that both the accountability of quality programming as well as the diversification of programming continues to welcome more families into recreation.
That is great. And following up on what you both said, I wanted to understand a little bit in deeper about, since the hub is bringing together a lot of initiatives. Also wanted to know, like, at the grassroots level, how do these children get to know about these programs? Like, are there any challenges for them to understand or to even know that these programs are available? Because sometimes, even with Pedesting, I kind of feel like there are people out there, but they do not get the information that this kind of technology or programs are available. So, do you guys also come across some challenges? How do you tackle them?
Yeah, the sports system is complex. Recreation and sports system is complex for any parent or any family. And so understanding that is one of the services we offer is a family navigation service.
Okay.
And so we've partnered closely with allied health professionals, the Alberta Children's Hospital, physiotherapists, the folks in education, to recommend to families that if they want, or if the child desires to have a recreation or sport as part of their life, that they can reach out to us. We'll meet with them. learn more about the needs of their family, and then help recommend programs that would be a good fit. And that can be an evolution. Maybe it's swimming that they want to start with, but they find that that's a lot of fun and they want to try a badminton program or a soccer program, and then we can help them navigate that. But otherwise, yes, I think that oftentimes it's really hard to know, and sometimes the language isn't clear enough to understand if the needs of the child or the youth that would be participating would be met. And so then we always encourage a conversation. So call one of the facilities, ask about the program, express the needs that you would have, and hopefully there's the ability to participate after that.
That is wonderful. So there's a very strong network at the grassroots level to keep bringing in and pushing it up, which is really great. So now that we've understood about what the hub does, so my next question would be like, what are the challenges these children and youth with disabilities face in terms of trying to participating in recreational activities, and how it impacts their social and personal development?
I'll reflect maybe a little bit on, so it's the Calgary Adapted Hub powered by Jumpstart, and I think that's an important connection to make, that we're supported financially and administratively in many respects by Jumpstart Canadian Tire's charitable arm. And Canadian Tire Jumpstart produces what's called the State of Sport report, where they reflect on what are the barriers for participation, not just for children with impairments or disabilities, but children, period. And one of the ideas that they've really focused on this last year is affordability. And we would argue that that's a similar challenge, if perhaps not a greater challenge, for children with impairment, particularly when you start to include issues like equipment. So for someone who wants to play para-ice hockey or sledge hockey, as it's traditionally been called, a sled is not a cheap implement to purchase. If they wanted to play Volt hockey, power wheelchair hockey at Vacova Center, as another example, the purchase of that piece of equipment is a barrier. And so, Jumpstart and Variety Children's Charity, which partners with Vacova and Volt, so we're connecting all of these various funders as well to enable participation through access to equipment. Because of our connection to Jumpstart and because of our 12 partners, we're also able to try to partner with other foundations, charitable arms, to encourage funding support for facility rental, or eliminating cost for registration. And so we're constantly looking for ways to try to increase the affordability, as opposed to having that remain a barrier and a challenge. That would be certainly one of them, that both Canadian Tire Jumpstart has identified for all children, and I would argue is perhaps even more pertinent for children with disabilities. Are there others that,
Yeah, the other one that comes to mind that I think during National Accessibility Week as well, that we would want to be really clear and to talk openly about, is that for children and youth that experience an invisible disability, their needs are often need to be advocated for by a parent or by a coach or somebody who understands what that looks like. We find that those that maybe have a physical impairment, it's often more obvious to a junior leader or a summer camp instructor or somebody on site at a recreation facility about what kind of accommodation needs to be made. But we are working with our friends at the Autism Asperger Friendship Society more closely to help to, as we phrase it, unlock the potential of our neurodiverse participants, as well as those with a visual impairment, to help the experience in a recreation facility be equally as welcoming and safe for them, even though it may not be visible when they walk in the door.
Yeah, and I think it's very, very crucial to address the invisible disabilities too, and I totally agree with you on that. So we're moving on to our next question. So we're gonna go a little bit out of the Calgary scene, but from your own experiences and your work in this field so far, what are some of the other innovative programs like this that you've come across that could create a greater impact in this field?
I think this would be pretty Calgary specific, but I think this happens elsewhere, is a model that David started 14 years ago, which is a multi-sport approach to bringing children in to recreation. So the program at Mount Royal that he started was called the Children's Adapted Physical Activity Program. It's been replicated at the MNP Community and Sports Center as Active Energizers. It's at the Vacova Center as the Children's Adapted Recreation Program, and at the University of Calgary as the Adapted Physical Activity Program for Children. But what it does is it pairs a child one-on-one or youth. I keep saying child, but really, you know, we look beyond the age of even 18 when we're talking about these programs. But it pairs a participant one-on-one with a volunteer, as well as offers a multi-sport experience so that when they're there, they learn about a variety of different sports and activities in hopes to maybe spark joy or involvement in one that then maybe they can pursue, but that they have that safe place to try. And in the program like David's and the one at Bakova, they also get to use the pool. So it's a land-based and aquatic-based program. And so I think that that's innovative in the way that it builds relationships for the families and the children, as well as provides the experiences that will hopefully be a positive starting place for recreation and sport, and then they can grow from there.
And in addition to that, and thank you very much, by the way, for profiling that program, there's also student volunteer involvement. And so it provides opportunities for young professionals to get hands-on experience working with children with diverse needs, and it allows them to then think about their own careers. And regardless of whether or not they go into specific paths that are specific to adaptive physical activity, they will at least have that lens as it relates to inclusion and working with people with disabilities. And some of the other programs and initiatives and facilities perhaps that are doing some really neat innovative things outside of Calgary would be the Ability Center, which is in Whitby, just east of Toronto, and it's a purpose-built facility from the ground up that focuses on inclusive and accessible recreation. If Calgary ever gets around to building a field house, I would love to see that field house mimic some of the great work and things that have happened at the Ability Center in Whitby. Another might be the Stedward Center, which is at the University of Alberta and named after Robert Stedward, who was the founding president of the International Paralympic Committee and also a professor at the University of Alberta and my supervisor for my PhD. And it's a facility housed within the university itself that is both focusing on programming, research, student connection, and it's a bit of a hub in and of itself for persons with impairment disability. And then the last example perhaps is the National Ability Center, which is in Park City, Utah. And again, a purpose-built facility that connected in part to when Salt Lake City hosted the 2002 Olympic and Paralympic Games, but it is designed from the ground up to be a center and a hub for adaptive physical activity, and it is out of this world insofar as the programming and the facilities and the equipment that they have for mountain biking, equestrian training. They have a venue, and perhaps another one that's closer to home is William Watson Lodge out in Kananaskis Provincial Park, which is a purpose-built facility by the Lougheed family when Kananaskis was first being created at Peter Lougheed Park, and it's designed to allow families that have persons with impairment in their families to be able to recreate and be in the mountains, to use the trails, to enjoy the great outdoors in an inclusive and accessible way. And so there's lots of examples that are both local but also globally.
It is actually very amazing to listen and know that all these facilities exist. And I do not have a much deeper understanding into this field, but then I've read some of it, how the same kind of setup, but specifically designed for the children, would help them in experiencing the same things that everybody else experiences, which is really good. And on that note, I also wanted to see, so when you compare, when you look at all these programs, so do you think there's a lot of scope for Calgary to keep growing, or do you think Calgary is already in a place where it's pretty established in this field? What do you think it's going to be like?
The part that I'm always amazed at is the outreach that comes to the Calgary Adapted Hub from organizations and groups that are doing inclusive and adaptive programming that we've never heard of or never considered. And two examples just in the last week. One is related to adapted or inclusive artistic swimming, so formerly synchronized swimming. And the second was cheerleading. And in both cases, these are not programs that we were aware of, knew existed, and they are either being initiated or somewhere along the line of running. And we're going to promote them. We're going to encourage people to consider them as options and opportunities, as we will the other programs that we're already aware of. But this happens quite often. And so there's all these little initiatives where people have passion, they have inspiration, and they are willing to kind of just go with it. And then when we find out about it, we love being able to take it to the next step to promote it and share it as widely as we can.
And I'm sure that will create a massive impact, along with the whatever impact has already been there.
Well, I think that's the hardest part, is cutting through all the noise. We were talking about social media this morning, and just like, how do you get to the right audience and let them know that your
Yeah.
program exists? And it's really challenging now. And so I'd like to
Yeah.
think that we're creating a bit of a connection point with families and children, and that they can come to us and find out about these existing programs. Well, the City of Calgary initiative with Recreation Discovery is another example.
Yeah. So I think from an innovation standpoint too, if anybody's engaging in conversation and they want to know where to put some energy, is we do see that it's still hard to retain participation. So much like we would say in any typical data throughout those teen years. So I think there's still space in the city to grow as far as what the youth into young adulthood experience, especially for a youth with a disability, what that looks like, and how all of the things we know to be good about sport and recreation are really important during those ages for mental health, for social well-being, for connection, for community. And so I would challenge a lot of organizations that now that maybe we've got some grassroots energy around Learn To and Intro, how do we really sustain that through and keep people active throughout their lifespan? And I think that sport has a great power to do that. I do think we need to be intentional and innovative about how we're going to do that.
And I agree. In fact, my next question was actually coming around that. So I wanted to understand a little bit deeper about what is the personal and social impact that this kind of sports have on the youth and children.
There's been a couple of instances where we have been purposeful in trying to ascertain feedback and understand the social impact of participation. And just a couple of quick examples that are probably more anecdotal, but it's feedback from parents. And so they talk about the struggles that they've had of trying to include their children in, I would say, more typical or traditional recreation programs, and they have just not found a fit. They have not found a place where they felt comfortable, welcomed, and where their child could participate in an enjoyable way in some respects. And in some of these adapted programs that we've offered, the gratitude and the appreciation that we receive from the parents is really quite heartwarming. Don't get me wrong, it's not always perfect, and there's lots of room for us to improve and to get better. But I would say that would be an example where particularly parents are finding places where their children can feel that they belong, and they can connect with other children, and they can feel a part of a larger community. And this isn't always just even registered programs either. So another example could be playgrounds. So the Jumpstart Playground in Bowness, as an example, is a place where families can come with children who are both able-bodied but also perhaps have an impairment, and they are playing together in an inclusive and accessible way. And so those interactions that take place socially and in non-kind of formalized ways, I think are also absolutely crucially important. So again, we're chipping away at lots of different aspects, but I would say, in my opinion, through sport and recreation, that's perhaps the most important enabler to connect people and to allow them to be part of community and to feel that they're contributing and somehow participating, as opposed to being isolated and pushed off to the side.
Yeah, I think when you say personal and social growth, I think this is an area Pedesting is leading in for sure, is that the barrier to participation might not be actually on site, or it might not be about a program so much as it may be about getting to a facility or to a space that you feel safe, welcoming, and encouraging for a participant. So I think there's a lot of outcomes that need to be considered before even coming to a space to recreate.
Exactly.
And then I also think that there's where the personal and social development might happen, again, could come from a program or service, but I'm thinking of our colleagues and friends at Vivo for Healthier Generations, and they've dedicated 2 hours a day in their facility right now to be sensory friendly. So it's reduced capacity, reduced noise, there's sensory equipment like backpacks in a sensory room available, the aquatic environment is impacted, the fitness environment is impacted, their indoor park is impacted. Therefore, for somebody who wants to have that experience, that might be a great place for community building, for making friends, for trying something new. So maybe it's up to us sometimes to ask the question of what would make that a positive experience, so that the personal and social development is included as much as maybe the skill development or the actual activity itself.
I agree. And this is my last question, which is also a continuation to your answer. So we spoke about the programs, we spoke about the advancements, the impact, and the challenges. So finally, I wanted to wrap it up with a very simple question, which you might have heard it a lot of time. So when it comes to accessing or experiencing recreation sport to both children and also youth, older adults, what are some of the stigma or the societal norms that is against them, or they feel that that prevent them from accessing these programs, from exploring these programs?
First, many of the families that call us, again, quite often in our conversations, will sometimes be brought to tears because they don't want their child to disrupt the experience for others.
Okay.
And so oftentimes what we work with the families on and with the providers is we talk about all abilities. And what does it look like if when all abilities are welcome in the same space, and what the learning comes from that, the peer-to-peer learning that happens, the empathy that's built for experiences for any of the participants. And so a lot of times I think it's, perhaps a family already feels like they shouldn't come to an activity, that they may not be welcome. And really where our encouragement right now would be is to have that conversation, and to ensure that if the coaching and the leadership is prepared to welcome a child who may become dysregulated during an activity, or perhaps needs an additional aid support due to not being able to utilize the same equipment as some of their peers. If those things are able to be accommodated, I think it's very important that we welcome all abilities into the program, so that the stigma is often stories that have been created or situations in which folks just have never had the ability to work together.
Okay.
And so I think coming together to offer those programs will help to reduce the stigma and the barriers, but it's also really important to move forward towards offering more inclusive programming.
I think too there's a stigma and a fear that it's going to be super complicated, and that perhaps as a coach at a community level, I don't have the skills, the knowledge to include a child with an impairment. And my teaching of adaptive physical activity has evolved over time, and one of the mentors who kind of taught me adaptive physical activity used to refer to adapted physical education or adapted physical activity. Really, all that means is good physical education and great physical activity, because you're focusing on the individual and adapting to their particular abilities and their particular needs. And we should be probably doing that with all individuals, regardless of whether or not it's an impairment or a disability, and that we should be trying to reflect and to support the individuals within a group context. And at the end of the day, it's actually not that complicated. It's just a matter of perhaps asking some questions, not being afraid, being willing to be a bit creative, and maybe think a little bit outside of the box insofar as how you've done things in the past. But I think people get a little overwhelmed, and pardon the pun, almost paralyzed by the fear of doing something wrong or saying something wrong, and so they just choose not to go down that path at all. And so what at least in my own teaching, I try to encourage my students to just go in with an open mind and relax and ask lots of questions and be curious and kind of enjoy that process of being creative and coming up with perhaps some innovative solutions, as opposed to being afraid of them.
That's so great knowing about these things, because even on a personal level, we all have our own fears and things that we think it's gonna be very challenging, and it takes a lot of effort sometimes, or just a change of a mindset to break them through and then go there and do that. So what you mentioned here is very, very essential. The level of coaching, the peer support, the organization support, the community support, everything plays a very crucial role in bringing them together to experience this recreation. That brings us to the end of the discussion. Thank you so much, both of you, for being so patient and then answering all these questions. So as we wrap up this National Accessibility Awareness Ability Week, we at Pedesting would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to both Dr. David and Ashley Fox for being here on this day. Thank you very much.
You're most
Thanks,
welcome.
Josephine.
Yeah.